Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of the European Conservatives podcast, Brussels and Beyond, a podcast designed to keep you in the loop about the political wheelings and dealings that are happening here in Brussels and in the capitals of Europe. My name is Zoltán Kottász. Three weeks after the European elections, the groups of the European Parliament are starting to take form. The New Look Parliament will hold its first plenary session in Strasbourg on the 16th of July, and the chamber will look markedly different as conservative, right-wing and anti-establishment parties made big gains all around Europe. The centre-right European People's Party will remain the largest group, followed by the Socialists, and the European Conservatives and Reformists have now overtaken the Liberal Renew group as the third largest party. In fifth place is the Identity and Democracy group led by Marine Le Pen's party, the National Rally. In sixth and seventh place are two leftist alliances that have fallen behind the pack. However, there are still dozens of MEPs without a group in the 720-seat parliament, but that could change in the next couple of weeks. For example, the German anti-immigration party, AfD, is on the verge of forming an entirely new group after it was expelled from Identity and Democracy. The decision was taken by a majority of member parties after the AfD's lead candidate, Maximilian Krah, made comments relativizing German war crimes during World War II. Apart from AfD's 15 MEPs, the new group will possibly include the Bulgarian Revival, the Spanish Sea Sabor la Fiesta, the Slovak Republika, the Romanian SOS Romania, the Greek Niki Party, and the Hungarian Our Homeland Movement. With its 6 seats, the Polish Confederacja would also be a great addition to the group, but its leaders are undecided whether they would be comfortable sitting in the same group with German nationalists, given the two countries' shared history. If it is formed, the new group will likely be the smallest one in the European Parliament, but a group nonetheless. Meanwhile, the Liberal Renew group lost 7 of their MEPs after former Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš's ANO movement decided to leave the alliance. "We are leaving Renew because we cannot fulfill our programme there and we don't want to betray our voters," said one of the party's MEPs, Ondrej Knotek. The ANO movement was never really a good fit within Renew. For instance, Andrej Babiš has become increasingly critical of the Green Deal and the Migration Pact, two flagship policy packages that have been primarily shaped by the mainstream groups in the European Parliament, including Renew. "We went to the elections to fight illegal migration, to change the Green Deal, which is destroying our European industry and agriculture and is having a negative impact on our citizens," explained Babiš. The former Prime Minister has maintained a good relationship with national conservative governments, such as those led by Poland's Law and Justice or the Hungarian Fidesz. Another party, the Dutch People's Party, VVD, will stay with the Renew group, at least for now. The expulsion of VVD was a hot topic within Renew in previous months. The leaders of the group were unhappy about the fact that VVD entered into a coalition government with Geert Wilders' Freedom Party in the Dutch Parliament. After the announcement of the new coalition agreement, Renew chairman Valery Hayer described the agreement, and I quote, "the opposite of what we defend in terms of values, the rule of law, the economy, the climate, and of course Europe." Renew, however, can hardly afford a further loss of seats after its 21-seat loss in the European elections. So instead of expelling VVD, they have chosen to send an observer to the offending party. The observer will be deployed to ascertain whether the VVD is crossing any red lines in terms of the group's values and liberal principles. I have here with me Matteo Albania, who is an expert on EU politics, and we are recording the conversation on Wednesday, 26th of June. Matteo, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We had the European elections almost 3 weeks ago, and since then, European parties have been busy trying to form alliances within the European Parliament. What can we conclude from the results?
Well, the results somehow have seen an unprecedented scenario. I mean, what many commentators are failing to acknowledge and to admit is that in the three biggest countries, Germany, France, and Italy, what they are called far right or center right forces have won in a landslide manner. In France with Front National, in Germany we had the CDU and CSU list and the FD, and in Italy, of course, the current sitting government of Giorgia Meloni had a very important result. And so the narrative that the center, the so-called coalition of the liberals, the socialists, and the EPP is holding its ground, I think it's misleading. There is definitely a shift to the right in Europe. We're seeing this in the main countries, in the main biggest countries, but we're seeing this also in other smaller countries. And of course, the establishment groups, establishment parties are trying to avoid this analysis, trying to keep the narrative that the center is holding its ground, that they can go business as usual. While I think that that would be a mistake, not acknowledging what these European elections have brought in terms of result and in terms of what the citizens want. And what the citizens want, I think it's a change. They want a change in Germany, they want a change in France, but they also acknowledge that the Italian government is doing currently a good job. And they awarded Giorgia Meloni and her party and her government with a landslide victory. So what I see now is that, of course, what used to be the third biggest group in the parliament, the one of the liberals, has lost its ground towards being the fourth group. So now the third group is the one of the European conservative and reformists. And I expect this is going to play a huge role now when we're going to enter into the phase of negotiating chairmen of committees in the parliament, of other top jobs and portfolios for EU commissioners. So I see this shift, and I also think that inside the main political party, inside the main political group, which is the EPP, there is a tendency of going more towards conservative policies and conservative parties. So also inside the EPP, I see this shift happening.
So there is definitely a shift to the right. That's obvious, even if the mainstream media or the mainstream parties don't want to acknowledge that. But it wasn't such a huge shift. I think maybe the expectations were too high on the right.
Well, that's always the game played by media. You know, you raise expectations. You play with the fear. You know, they accuse often far right to play with fears, but actually is that what they did. They play with the fear of an incumbent surge of far right. Well, let's define what is a surge. I mean, of course, if you would expect the ID group, ACR, and other far-right formations to have a strong majority in the parliament, that was unlikely. So in that terms, it didn't happen. But indeed, the expectations were very, very high. But there was an increase. And this is not the first increase. Already in 2019, in the last time around, there was already an increase compared to 2014. There is a shift of the parliament towards the right. So this cannot be ignored anymore, at the peril that in 5 years, we're going to see an even bigger shift to the right and an even more discontent towards the European Union as it is now.
You mentioned that politics in the European Parliament could change, and because it changes in the European Parliament, it could change in how the European Council deals with different issues. Can you explain how the shift to the right in the European Parliament actually impacts how European politics is done in the European Parliament?
Well, let's go back to 2019. The Green Wave, the success of the Greens in 2019 had a big imprint on the Commission and on the mandate that we just finished. So the Green Deal, how von der Leyen, the EPP, and the big coalition had carried on with policies and reforms was very much leaning towards the green policies. So I expect that now, conversely, that we have a bigger majority on the right, those policies would be left aside, and there would be more focus on what is the concerns of the people that voted for these parties. I'm not talking about stopping illegal migration. I'm talking about more competitiveness for industries, for companies. I'm talking about more putting people back at the center of attention. So I expect this shift to happen, or otherwise the current coalition, I don't think, will hold its ground for long.
And what do you project in terms of alliances within the European Parliament? Of course, so far, the European People's Party, which is a centre-right establishment, has been cooperating with the Social Democrats and the Liberal Renew group in the European Parliament, the so-called majority. Will this change? I mean, could we see the European People's Party move closer to the European Conservatives, or even possibly the Identity and Democracy, which is even further to the right?
While their leaders and while the leader of the APP and other head of state and government representing the APP are very clear during these days that they will not accept any cooperation with either ECR or even more with ID Group, the reality is another one. And the reality is that inside the APP itself, there are pulls towards going to the right. There are political forces like the French conservatives, like in Slovenia, the party of the former Prime Minister Janez Janša, they really would like to see the PP shifting towards more conservative positions. There are also more liberal forces inside the PP. So what I think is going to happen is that the PP has to decide what is its mission, what its values are, where do they stand. They cannot be mingling anymore with the liberals or with the conservatives. They really need to decide what's their essence. And there, I think that their essence is gonna be more shifting towards the conservatives. Probably it's not gonna be a de facto alliance. It's not gonna be written on a paper, but on certain files, on certain issues, I expect to see voting together with ECR, with ID Group, in exchange of some power share, being rapporteurs, being help in other files, in other votes together with ID and with ECR. If that is going to lead then further in the mandate or in the next one to a more proper alliance, this has to be seen. But in the next years, we're going to have more elections in member states, in Germany, probably Spain, where most likely EPP governments will be again in power. So, and those are more conservative governments. So I do expect more in the next mandate or in the second half of this mandate, more shift to the right also on behalf of the EPP.
Mm-hmm. The groups are already forming. So the European People's Party has admitted some new members. It has grown in numbers. The European Conservatives have also grown in numbers. And I think the Identity and Democracy Party, so all these parties on the right are admitting new parties. What do these admittances tell us of where these groups are currently standing? Can we make any conclusions from how they are shaping up to be at the moment?
Well, the conclusion is that the galore and the claims of the day after the elections that liberals, socialists, and the PP held their power share were proclaimed a bit too soon. I said back then, and I reiterate now, the message is that the day after the elections, there were over 100 MEPs, either in the non-ascrit group or non-assigned to any political group. And we're seeing now these MEPs finding their homes, and their homes are in the ID Group, in ECR, in the EPP, while ALDE is losing members. The socialists didn't make any significant gain. So the reality is that the group of that 100 MEPs is a bloc that within its differences can be likely assigned towards the right of the hemicycle. And this is again another reality check that the members of the parliament need to acknowledge while building the political agenda of the next 5 years.
So the EU summit will take place on Thursday and Friday. So we're talking on Wednesday, so we can't really talk about it. But without trying to forecast what will happen, who the European leaders choose for the European institutions' top jobs. So will Ursula von der Leyen be re-elected as European Commissioner? Who will be the European Council President? Who will be the European Parliament President? Without making any projections, how do the results of the elections impact the balance of power within the European Council, with how the member states negotiate with each other about these issues?
Well, and I go back to what I said at the beginning. In the three biggest countries, in 2 out of 3, so in Germany and France, the sitting governments have suffered heavy and big losses. So I expect Germany and France, while their sitting head of state and government, so Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz, are still there, to have less power in negotiating not only the names, not only the top jobs, but also portfolios, and most importantly, the direction where Europe wants to go. On the other end, we have Viktor Orban in Hungary, we have Giorgia Meloni in Italy, that have proven to still have consensus from their citizens, and they are claiming, rightly so, to shape or to contribute in shaping the direction where the European Union will go, regardless of the names, which of course we don't know it yet. I mean, there seems to be an agreement on the 3 names that everybody and everyone knows. But regardless of that, I think that there is a consensus on the fact that more right-wing policies need to be addressed, and this cannot be delayed anymore. This cannot be ignored anymore. And the legislative elections in France that are going to also be taking place, they're going to be held this Sunday, are going to be another signal that citizens want a shift, a change, demand a change in those policies. Ignoring it will be a capital mistake. Going business as usual will be a huge misunderstanding of those demands, and I'm not so sure then the Europe and European Union will be perceived as well as it is if those demands are continuously being ignored.
So Emmanuel Macron, when he negotiates with the other European leaders, he has to take into account that maybe in a week's time, the French people will have voted a Marine Le Pen government. So he has to take that into account.
He should, as much as Olaf Scholz should take into account that his party scored below Alternative for Deutschland and got half of the consensus that the CDU and CSU got. I was expecting Olaf Scholz to acknowledge the result and resign. He didn't do so. Next year there are going to be elections in Germany, but definitely the liberal leftist camp, being represented by their 2 champions, being Scholz and France, has been completely disintegrated by these elections. This is the reality. This is the truth. So I think that they are weakened. I think that the elections this Sunday in France will further confirm the political scenario that was given to us after the European elections in France. And therefore, I think that their Macron and Scholz decision-making power in the Council is going to be significantly downsized, especially also in the months to come. So not only just now while discussing the top jobs, but really while discussing the political agenda.
What are the main issues that could be impacted with this shift to the right? I think you mentioned the green agenda, the Green Deal. What are the main issues that the election results could have an impact on?
I think that the demand from citizens voting for certain parties is to stop with this Green Deal and this green regulation, which is definitely perceived as too much too soon. Europe has been perceived on the green transition as overly ambitious and not realistic, from cars to heat pumps. Its targets are not being well communicated to the citizens. Secondly, there is a demand to have a crystal clear position on how to fight, on how to combat illegal migration to Europe. This has to be also addressed significantly, and it cannot be any more compromise or doubts about how to address that. Thirdly, competitiveness is going to be crucial. Entrepreneurs have often been blamed for environmental change and often been blamed for not respecting workers' rights, but they are the engine in many countries that lead growth and lead to employment. So I think that we're going to see also a shift on how Europe is going to deal with regulations and with laws and with bills that are going to affect the competitiveness.
How does the presidency of Hungary, which starts on July the 1st, impact these decisions?
I think it comes at the right time, in the sense that the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, has been very clear repeatedly on the priorities of the Hungarian presidency. And it comes at a time where indeed that shift requested by the citizen should happen, with the negotiations for the top jobs, with the negotiations for the portfolio of the Commission. And Orban and Hungary have been very clear on their priorities. So I think that they can really play a crucial role, a big role, together with other partners. And I'm thinking about, of course, about Italy. They can play a big role in shifting, in really giving a right direction to Europe and to what European citizens want.
A question about Ukraine. Can the attitude towards Ukraine change somewhat? I'm asking this question because not just because of the shift to the right in European Parliament, and there are some Ukraine skeptic, maybe more pro-Russian parties who have had better results. For example, the Austrian FPÖ, AfD. But also in the national politics, if Marine Le Pen wins, she forms a government, she has also been skeptical of Russian sanctions against Russia, against providing weapons to Ukraine. And Geert Wilders in the Netherlands is also one of these people, even though he has a broad coalition with more pro-Ukraine parties. Can these election results somehow change how the EU views Ukraine?
Well, we are now in the third year of the conflict, and I think time is mature to change the conversation around this. In the last months, we have heard several times from President Macron the call for sending troops, European troops, to Ukraine, and this has caused quite some criticism. And it is definitely not what the other leaders or the citizens in Europe want. I think that while it is clear that Europe has a message towards who is the aggressor, who is the country living in a war, and who is on which side, on the other hand, nobody wants this war to continue. So the fact that there are ongoing attempts to hold peace talks, that's already a progress. That's already something that means that there is a shift. And the result in France is also, in a way, an answer to the claims that Macron did on the war in Ukraine and on the idea of building a European army and sending troops to Ukraine. So I see definitely a shift on how the European Union deals with Russia, on whether to continue with sanctions, and whether sanctions are effective or not, and also how to be really a peacemaker and a negotiating actor within this conflict.
So all in all, as a final conclusion, how do we compare the past 5 years to the upcoming next 5 years, which of course we cannot predict, but maybe we can give some sort of takeaway on what could happen?
The past 5 years, I see them as Ursula von der Leyen being elected as a president of the EPP, but de facto being almost puppeteered by the left side of the coalition, in an attempt to keep the coalition very tight and very knitted together. I think that she overdid, and she leaned too much towards the left, towards the liberals, towards the Greens policies. And this, I think she herself, the EPP itself, realized that was a mistake. Because they alienate part of the electorate, and their most recent bills passed to please the farmers are exactly a proof of that. So in the next 5 years, I think we're going to see more of that. The EPP doesn't want to lose its electorate, its voters, that they're more conservative. Von der Leyen herself, if she's going to be reconfirmed, or whoever is going to be confirmed at the helm of the Commission, will need to address those requests from the conservative side, because the election result, however we look at it, is that the leftist side of the parliament has lost seats and the right side of the parliament has gained seats. So I see a political agenda that is going to shift towards there, and I see a president of the Commission who is going to be much more careful in not alienating that electorate, that voters, but rather trying to keep them together, to keep them close, steer the ship, to steer the navigation throughout the next 5 years towards that side of the agenda, as it was done in the last 5 years after the Green Wave and after the more leftist side of the parliament won. So I think that elections, it's a democratic process, and leaders should always follow the result of this democratic process and not ignoring it, as I fear that might be the case. I hear many comments of, we should keep the things that it goes because the majority of people voted for center parties, pro-European parties, which is, I think, a misleading interpretation of what happened in the last European elections.
Matteo, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
In an interview with the European Conservative, Nicolas Bay, a French right-wing member of the European Parliament, who was previously a politician in Marine Le Pen's party, said that the rejection of illegal migration and the EU's Green Deal are the main reasons why European voters voted the way they did at this year's EU elections. Europe has been undergoing a migratory crisis for almost 10 years, and Brussels' response has been to organise the arrival of ever greater numbers of migrants, he said. According to the latest opinion polls, Marine Le Pen's National Rally and its right-wing allies are set to win the first round of French parliamentary elections on June the 30th, with 35-36% of the votes. On the question of what is at stake for France in the upcoming elections, Nicolas Bay said, and I quote, "It's a question of avoiding ruin and chaos, whether it's by accelerating with the left or by taking more measured steps with Emmanuel Macron. A victory for the right is essential to protect the French, restore public finances, restore our education and health systems, lower taxes to free up work and growth, to stop mass immigration and kick out illegals, to fight radical Islam. It's a titanic task, but there's still time," he said. And that concludes this episode of Brussels and Beyond. Don't forget to read our magazine, check out our website, subscribe to our Twitter, Facebook and YouTube channels, and watch our monthly TV show, Inside Brussels. Hope you tune in again next week. Have a very good week. Bye-bye.